And I wanted to start it out because in the previous talks, there was this question about what do you need to become a good diplomat and how can a country like Malta punch above its weight. I think these are very interesting questions. I specialize in negotiation and international relations, but I am always particularly interested in strategic negotiation. And what I want to talk to you about is to briefly go over a few points in strategic negotiation and how that works in particular examples. But what kind of things you need to become a diplomat. I really agree with the patience and the perseverance, but I also think it's all about asking questions. We always want to put our opinions, our ideas, our positions out there, but 9 out of 10 times it's far more interesting to ask questions. And second to that, how can a country like Malta or other small states punch above their weight? If you actually look deep into negotiations, take the COP26, we actually see that the smaller countries are far more powerful than we expect them to be. And this is because they become very creative. They go beyond what other countries do. And I think this has very much to do with the element of power. And when we talk about negotiation and how to negotiate in these large settings, as the COP26, but also in other ways, it is all about power. So before we delve into more strategic negotiation, a little bit about power. Probably the majority of you knows about power in international relation, hard and soft power. But when we go to negotiation, we actually make another differentiation. The first one is personal power. Personal power has to do with the person you are. And you would probably agree with me that there's a difference in whether you want to negotiate with Donald Trump or if you want to negotiate with Ms. Merkel, or if you would like to negotiate with Emmanuel Macron or Biden or Putin or anybody. So the person going into the negotiation actually makes a difference. So that is influential to the negotiation itself. Then we talk about structural power, and this has to do with the hard and the soft power. This always has to do with economic and military strength, but there are some that argue now, and I have to say I strongly agree with this, that the EU has actually discovered a third hard form of power, which is the power of regulation, because the EU creates a lot of regulation. This influences the world and gives it a very strong position in a lot of its negotiations. Soft power has to do with culture, history, the way you can influence other countries indirectly. When we get to the final form of power, and this is the one that is actually the most important for negotiation, it is contextual power, situational power. Is your power relevant to the situation you are in? Take, for instance, EU negotiations with Great Britain over Brexit. Great Britain is considered one of the military powers of the European Union and of the European continent. So in that sense, they have a lot of military power. That is a form of hard power. You can achieve a lot by it. If you look at the United States, if you look at Russia, if you look at China, building up your military power can help you have influence on the international stage. But that power of the United Kingdom does not relate to the negotiations when it comes to the European Union, because this is about trade, this is about economics, this is about agreements on how to deal with each other in a political sense. So military power does not play a role. And this is what makes it very interesting for smaller countries when they start negotiating, because they understand that they have to translate their lack of power or the actual power that they have into the situation that they find themselves in. Because they are no more prone to finding alliances, to really make concessions, to make clear statements, to find out what kind of tactics they can use. They are very strategic in how they approach it. If I can take an example on how this perspective really influences the situation in how you negotiate, what I always find interesting is that when I talk to diplomats, when I talk to negotiators, they focus on just the negotiation as is. So let's take the example of what's currently happening in Ukraine. There's a lot of Russian movement with military equipment, and everybody's getting a little bit nervous. And this is understandable because it's a region that is currently not very peaceful. Things are happening in the border regions. We know what happened with the Crimea. So how do we put this in perspective? This is one of the important questions when we think about negotiation. When a lot of these parties start to sit down and actually talk to each other, they look at the situation as is, so only that particular situation. But what we have found out through research is that it's not really only about that situation when it comes to international political negotiation. It's about the big picture. And this is something we need to understand before we can sit down in negotiating. So, what is the big picture that we have to consider in relation to Ukraine and Russia? If we go back almost 30 years, the Soviet Union dissolved, and one of the things that the Russian state, the new Russian state, was particularly against was the expansion of NATO and the EU. It wanted to keep a buffer zone between Russia and the EU and NATO. But a lot of these countries that were in that buffer zone actually wanted to become part of these institutions for their own security. What we see that Russia does in its approach to these countries on the border zone with the European Union and with NATO countries is that we see that they constantly destabilize them, for the very simple reason that they want to keep them from becoming a part of NATO and the EU, because if you're a destabilized country, you cannot become part of the EU or NATO. So by keeping it destabilized, by keeping it in a state of unrest, they prevent it from becoming a member of these institutions. Knowing that, we can understand how they sit down at the negotiations. Russia probably sits down at the negotiations not to achieve a peace agreement, not to achieve an agreement on how to deal with the Crimea or with the border zones in Ukraine or with the unrest in Georgia or in the unrest in Bosnia and Herzegovina. They're probably sitting down because they know that internationally is expected of them to sit down, but their actual intention is not to reach an agreement. Understanding this can help us understand how the negotiations will move forward. So once we understand all of this, and I'm doing this a little bit quicker because there's a lot of other things that we want to consider before we can understand what the actual strategy is of a country. But once we understand the strategy, that's when we can start looking at how do we want to work with negotiation. There's a few things that I want to go over when it comes to negotiation and show you a little bit about strategies and tactics that you can use when you start negotiating or when you become a diplomat. And I'm going to share my screen. This is a lot of inception. And if I'm right, you will be able to see this now. What you see here is the types of strategy in negotiation, which is competition, compromising, collaboration, avoidance, and accommodation. These are influenced by different elements within your strategy. On the one hand, we have either uncooperative or cooperative behavior, or assertive and unassertive behavior. Now, assertive and unassertive behavior have to do with relative power. So to the actual context, to the situation that you find yourself, the power that you have, is that relevant? And there is the stakes in the outcome. If you have high stakes in the outcome, you will probably become competitive because you want to achieve something, or you will become collaborative. This is very dependent on how you are in your behavior in cooperation or uncooperation. When you score low on the importance of the relationship quality, you will become uncooperative. This is the same when you are low on the interest in the dependency. What we mean with the relationship quality is whether or not you feel or you think that the relationship itself is important. So to go back even further in time, maybe some of you have heard of the getting to yes method. This was developed by Harvard, and what Harvard was assigned was by the US government to find out why the US was so unsuccessful in negotiating with the Soviet Union. They wanted to understand why the Soviet Union was always pulling the longer end of the rope than the US. So they developed this whole strategy of getting to yes. Well, actually what it was about is that Russia understood what some of the best negotiators in the world understand. And now you might be thinking, like, who are the best negotiators in the world? They are a group that you might actually not expect, because the best negotiators in the world are children. And they are the best negotiators for a very simple reason. Children understand that their parents will love them come what may. And they are able to use that and leverage that power into getting whatever they want, because they know that at the end of the day, the parent will not abandon them. Now, Russia understood the exact same thing, not so much that they knew that the rest of the world loved them come what may, but rather they understood that come what may, Russia was there to stay, or the Soviet Union was there to stay. So in whatever was going to happen in the future, you would have to deal with them anyway. However they behaved, however they acted, they were a superpower that needed to be dealt with. So for Russia, the relationship quality wasn't that important, because they knew they were going to be part of any negotiation anyway. This immediately put them into a competitive, sometimes compromising or avoidant type of strategy. And being on the competitive side, we do see that they are most of the time a little bit more successful, and at least in international political negotiation, we see that competitiveness together with collaborativeness can be more successful. However, I need to say that none of them are the perfect strategy. This really depends on the context that you are in. So this is a little bit on the strategies, the general strategies that you have. You have to imagine that a strategy is something that you use to move towards your goal. However, we know that not only one road leads to Rome. There are several roads that lead to Rome. And this is exactly what strategy is, an overview of the different roads that can lead to Rome. So that when there is a problem, when there is a blockage, you can easily switch to another road to achieve your goals. So once you've determined all these different roads that you can take and which one might probably fit you best, that's when we start looking at tactics. Tactics are elements that we can use to actually either switch to different roads when there are blockages, or to accelerate or amplify or embody, strengthen the road that we want to take. Here you see an overview of all kinds of different tactics, and some might speak for themselves, and some you might think, what is that actually about? I will highlight a few that I always find interesting. The first one, and this is one that people always forget as one of the most strong tactics that you can use, is agenda setting. What we see in international relations, what we see in diplomacy, what we see in all the negotiations, is that the person that is able to set the agenda basically holds the power of determining of what is and what isn't discussed. What are you going to discuss first? Is it going to be the most important element, or is it going to be the least important element? And are you going to leave the most important one to the last so that you can put time pressure on the group and get the deal that you want to? Because under time pressure, everything becomes fluid. So agenda setting is a very powerful and interesting tactic to use. I'm Dutch, as you might know by my name, and we the Dutch pride ourselves that we are not susceptible to flattery and charm. But actually we are. Research has found out that the Dutch are very open to flattery and charm. So whenever I meet Dutch people, I can immediately see that when you take them out for lunch, if you take them out for dinner, if you tell them their hair looks nice, if you tell them the shirt is nice, they will like you more. This is not only for the Dutch, of course, this is also for a lot of other cultures and for a lot of other people. Flattery and charm works. But why is this an important tactic? For the very simple reason that when the likability factor goes up, there is a higher possibility of being awarded a deal than when somebody doesn't like you. Think about this yourself. If you like someone, it is more probable that you are willing to make a concession than when you dislike someone. Then there's another tactic in there that you might think about, what is that actually? And that is the salami tactics. The salami tactics is a very interesting one. It basically states that if I want to feed you a salami, you probably don't want to eat the whole thing. But if I slice it up into very nice, neat little slices, and I give you each slice every time, you're probably enjoying the salami. And by the end, I might have fed you the whole salami after all. What it basically means is that we try, and what we want to achieve, to slice everything up in smaller deals. And by feeding you all these smaller deals and getting your agreement on every single element of that, in the end, I am able to give you the salami the way I want it. Because you do not see the bigger picture, but you only see the small elements of the deal. The final one that I always like to talk about is timing. Because timing is a dangerous tactic, but it's also a very interesting one. So we talked about power. Structural power is basically constant over time. It has to do with your economics, with your military, with the size of your population, the resources that you have. But timing can change the context in which it becomes relevant. So if you are not strong on the military front, timing might help you to break a strong military power. Think of Vietnam. The US being the economical power, military power, superpower, didn't in the end win simply because of the context. The situation over time changed. Another example of how timing influences negotiation is when the Dutch were going for a seat on the Security Council. The Dutch ambassador went over to the British ambassador and asked the British ambassador, "Can I count on your vote?" The British ambassador said, "Of course you can. Why wouldn't I want you in the Security Council? We are very good partners and we've always been allies. Of course I'm going to vote for you." 15 minutes later, the vote commences, and lo and behold, the British do not vote in favor of the Dutch getting the seat on the Security Council. After the vote, the Dutch ambassador goes over again to the British ambassador and asks him, "What happened? Why didn't you vote in favor for us?" To which the British ambassador said, "Sorry." The Dutch ambassador says, "Well, 15 minutes ago, you told me you were going to vote in favor of us." The British ambassador says, 15 minutes ago, that's a completely different world. So this is a little bit about strategy and tactics. This is a little bit about negotiation. I will stop the sharing.